married into the Harris family for a few months, and while she was still adjusting to the household dynamics, she made every effort to be respectful and helpful. Mr. Harris, her father-in-law, was a reserved and disciplined man who rarely expressed emotions, but she admired his quiet strength. That morning, while cleaning the bathroom, Emily noticed that the faucet was leaking. She tried twisting the handle, but the steady drip of water continued. Knowing little about plumbing, she decided to ask Mr. Harris for help. She found him reading in the living room and hesitantly approached. "Mr. Harris, I think something's wrong with the faucet in the upstairs bathroom. Would you mind taking a look?" she asked politely. He glanced at her, then nodded without a word and followed her up the stairs. The bathroom was small, and as Mr. Harris bent down to inspect the pipes under the sink, Emily stood nearby, waiting in case he needed assistance. Just then, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Jake had returned home earlier than expected. As he walked toward the hallway, he noticed that the bathroom door was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, he was met with the unexpected sight of his wife and his father standing together in the enclosed space. For a brief moment, silence filled the room, but Jake's mind had already raced ahead to its own conclusion. His expression darkened as he gritted his teeth. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp with accusation. Emily's eyes widened in shock, and Mr. Harris stood up, calmly wiping his hands on a towel. "The faucet was leaking. I was just helping Emily fix it," Mr. Harris stated evenly. But Jake wasn't listening. His thoughts were clouded by suspicion, the image before him igniting a jealousy he hadn't known he possessed. His gaze darted between Emily and his father, searching for hidden guilt in their faces. "This doesn't look like just fixing a faucet," he snapped, his tone laced with disbelief. Emily felt her heart sink. The man she loved, the one who had vowed to trust her, was now looking at her as if she had betrayed him. "Jake, please, listen to me," she pleaded, but his expression remained rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. The morning had started like any other, but in an instant, everything had changed. Emily stood frozen in disbelief, her heart pounding as she processed Jake's words. She had expected surprise, maybe even confusion, but not this immediate, unrelenting suspicion. Mr. Harris, always composed, let out a slow breath and faced his son with an expression that was more disappointed than angry. "Jake," he said in a firm yet calm voice, "you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment." But Jake wasn't ready to listen. His gaze flickered back to Emily, his eyes filled with hurt and doubt. "How can I not?" he shot back. "I walk in and see the two of you in here together with the door closed. What am I supposed to think?" His voice wavered between anger and something more vulnerable. Betrayal. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had never imagined a moment like this in their marriage, where Jake would doubt her so completely. "You're supposed to trust me," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you really think I would do something like that? With your father?" The very idea was absurd, insulting even. But the fact that Jake entertained it, even for a second, cut her deeper than she could express. Mr. Harris shook his head, exasperated. "You need to take a step back, son," he said, crossing his arms. "I raised you to be better than this." His disappointment was evident, but Jake's stubbornness only deepened. "You don't get it," Jake muttered. "You don't know what it's like to feel like the person you love could betray you." At that, Mr. Harris's expression darkened. "Don't assume you know what I've been through," he said, his tone clipped. For the first time, there was tension between father and son, a crack in the foundation that had always held firm. Emily, meanwhile, was trying to hold back tears. She had always believed that love was built on trust. But standing here now, facing her husband's accusations, she realized how fragile that trust could be. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "I can't believe you'd rather think the worst of me than listen to reason." Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. "Emily, he hesitated, but his silence said more than words ever could. He didn't know what to believe, and that hesitation hurt more than outright accusation. Emily inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. She had always been patient with Jake, understanding of his insecurities, but this was different. This wasn't about a small misunderstanding. This was about who they were as a couple. And if Jake couldn't trust her, what did they even have left? Finally, she shook her head. "I need some air," she murmured, pushing past him and walking out of the bathroom. Jake stood there, his fists clenched, watching her go. Mr. Harris sighed, his disappointment evident. "You need to fix this, Jake," he said quietly, "before it's too late." But as Jake stared after Emily's retreating figure, he wasn't sure if he even knew how. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her suitcase open beside her, hands trembling as she folded her clothes with mechanical precision. Every movement felt heavy, weighed down by the betrayal she never thought she would experience. Not betrayal in the traditional sense, but the kind that stung deeper. Jake's lack of trust in her, his willingness to believe the worst, had left a wound that no apology could easily mend. The argument replayed in her mind like a broken record, the disbelief in Jake's eyes, the anger in his voice, the way he had looked at her as if she were a stranger, not the woman he had vowed to love and trust. She had begged for his faith in her, but he had hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Downstairs, Mr. Harris sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped in front of him, his face lined with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with age. He had tried talking to Jake, had tried to make him see reason, but his son's stubbornness had proved impenetrable. He had never imagined the boy he raised, the son he loved, could so easily turn on the two people who cared for him the most. The creak of the stairs made Mr. Harris lift his head, and a moment later, Emily appeared in the doorway, her suitcase in hand. The sight made his heart sink. "Emily," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this." She forced a small, sad smile. "I think I do." He exhaled slowly, nodding in reluctant understanding. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I need space. I can't stay in a house where I feel like a suspect instead of a wife." Her voice wavered, but she steadied herself. "Maybe if I leave, Jake will finally understand what he's about to lose." Mr. Harris studied her, admiration flickering through his sorrow. Emily was strong, stronger than Jake gave her credit for. He only hoped his son would wake up before it was too late. The sound of footsteps made them both turn. Jake stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale, his eyes flickering between Emily and the suitcase. "You're leaving," he said flatly, as if saying it out loud would make it real. Emily met his gaze, her heart aching at the pain in his expression, but she refused to waver. "I have to." Jake swallowed hard, stepping forward. "Emily, please. I was angry. I wasn't thinking straight. Can't we talk about this?" She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "That's the problem, Jake. We did talk. I begged you to believe me, and you didn't." She shook her head. "I can't be in a marriage where I have to prove my innocence every time you get insecure." Jake's hands clenched at his sides. "I made a mistake. And now you have to live with it," she said gently. "Maybe this will make you realize what trust really means." With that, she turned and walked out the door. Jake stood frozen as the door clicked shut behind Emily. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating in its intensity. He had thought his anger was justified, that his suspicions were natural. But now, faced with the emptiness she left behind, he could see nothing but his own failure. The house felt different without her. The silence was deafening, an unbearable reminder of what he had done. Every corner of the home they had built together felt hollow, and as if she had taken the warmth with her. Jake ran a hand over his face, his heart pounding. Could he fix this? Or had he already lost the woman he loved? The days that followed were a blur. At work, he struggled to focus. His colleagues, who once greeted him with easy camaraderie, now kept their distance. It wasn't until his closest friend, Mark, pulled him aside that he realized the full extent of what had happened. "Jake, what the hell is wrong with you?" Mark demanded, arms crossed over his chest. Jake frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mark scoffed. "You accused Emily of cheating? On what grounds? Because she was in the same room as your father?" His voice was sharp, laced with disappointment. "You didn't even give her a chance, did you?" Jake's stomach twisted. Hearing it spoken aloud made it sound even worse. I let my emotions get the best of me." Mark shook his head. "Yeah, you did. And now she's gone. Do you even realize what you've done?" Yes. Jake clenched his jaw. He didn't need the reminder. He felt the consequences every second of the day. But hearing it from Mark, someone he had always respected, made it sting even more. That night, Jake sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the letter Emily had left behind. He had been too afraid to read it before, fearing her words would be the final blow. But now, he needed to face it. Jake, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not because I want to leave, but because I have to. I loved you with all my heart. I thought we were partners, a team, but the moment you doubted me, everything changed. You looked at me like I was a stranger, not the woman you promised to trust. I don't know if you'll ever understand how much that hurt, but I hope one day you'll realize that love without trust is just an illusion. Take care of yourself. Emily? Jake read the letter twice, his vision blurring. He had done this. He had destroyed the trust that held their marriage together. For the first time in his life, Jake truly understood what regret felt like, and he didn't know if he would ever get the chance to make things right. Jake sat in the quiet of their once shared bedroom, Emily's letter still clutched in his hands. The words cut deep, each sentence a painful reminder of what he had thrown away. He had let his insecurities consume him, allowing jealousy to overshadow years of love and trust. Now, all that remained was silence and the echo of his mistakes. Days passed, and the weight of her absence grew heavier. Every morning, he instinctively reached for her beside him, only to be met with cold sheets. The house no longer smelled of her lavender perfume, and the sound of her laughter, once filling the rooms with warmth, had become a distant memory. The realization was suffocating. Emily wasn't just taking space in his life. She was his life. Desperation gnawed at him. He needed to fix this, to prove that he wasn't the man who had hurt her. He visited her favorite coffee shop, hoping to find her there, but the barista only gave him a sympathetic shake of the head. He even reached out to her best friend, Sarah, who barely spared him a glance before saying, "If you really love her, let her have her peace." But peace was the last thing Jake felt. He needed to see her, to tell her that he understood now, how deeply he had betrayed her trust and how much he was willing to fight for their love. The problem was, he didn't know where she had gone. It wasn't until a week later that he finally got a lead. His father, the very man he had wrongfully accused, was the one to help him. "She's staying at her sister's place in Portland," his father revealed one evening over the phone. His voice was calm but firm. "I don't know if she'll want to see you, but if you go, make sure you're ready to face what you've done." Jake didn't hesitate. He packed a bag, got into his car, and started the long drive to Oregon. Every mile felt like a journey through his own guilt. He replayed the moment in the bathroom over and over, realizing how irrational he had been. He had been blinded by his own fears, too proud to stop and listen. When he finally arrived at Emily's sister's house, his heart pounded against his ribs. Standing on the porch, he hesitated for the first time. What if she refused to see him? What if he had already lost her forever? Summoning his courage, he knocked. A few moments later, the door opened, and there she was, Emily. Her eyes widened in surprise, but there was no relief, no immediate forgiveness, just silence. "Jake?" she finally said, her voice guarded. He swallowed hard. "Emily, I know I don't deserve another chance, but please, just let me say what I came here to say." She didn't move, didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either, and for the first time in weeks, Jake felt the smallest glimmer of hope.